Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. Right now, much of the global conversation around the escalating conflict involving Iran is built on a familiar assumption: even if the United States and its partners achieve clear military superiority, it will not translate into lasting strategic success. The argument draws heavily from recent history, particularly Iraq and Afghanistan, where battlefield dominance failed to produce stable political outcomes. But while that lesson remains relevant, it may also be incomplete. There is another scenario, less frequently discussed but strategically significant, in which military pressure, combined with internal dynamics inside Iran, could lead not just to tactical success, but to a deeper transformation of the regional balance of power. This scenario is difficult, uncertain, and highly contingent, but it is not impossible, and it deserves closer examination. To understand why, it is important to separate three layers of analysis that are often conflated: military capability, political transformation, and long-term strategic impact. At the military level, there is little ambiguity about the balance of power. The United States, particularly when operating alongside Israel, possesses overwhelming advantages in air superiority, intelligence, precision strike capability, and command and control systems. Iran, by contrast, relies on a combination of asymmetric tools, ballistic missiles, proxy networks, and geographic depth. These capabilities can impose costs and create regional instability, but they do not negate the fundamental imbalance in conventional military power. In a sustained confrontation that avoids large-scale ground invasion, it is plausible that U.S. forces could significantly degrade Iran's military infrastructure, limit its ability to project power, and establish a form of operational dominance without direct occupation. This is what might be described as military victory without territorial control. However, military outcomes alone do not determine strategic success. The more complex and contested question lies in the political domain, specifically whether external pressure can interact with internal dynamics to produce meaningful change within Iran itself. This is where the standard narrative tends to stop, often concluding that regime change is unrealistic or prohibitively costly. But that conclusion may rely on an overly static view of Iran's internal structure. Like many political systems under prolonged stress, Iran is not monolithic. It contains multiple centers of power, including clerical authorities, elected institutions, security organizations, and economic networks, all operating within a framework that has historically balanced ideological control with pragmatic adaptation. Recent developments suggest that this internal equilibrium may be under increasing strain. Economic pressure, driven by sanctions, inflation, and structural inefficiencies, has already affected large segments of the population. War-related uncertainty adds another layer of stress, not only economically, but psychologically and politically. In such conditions, differences within the elite can become more pronounced. While these divisions are often difficult to observe directly, they can manifest in policy inconsistencies, shifts in rhetoric, or changes in the behavior of key institutions. The emergence of even limited fractures within the governing structure can significantly alter the trajectory of a crisis. In addition to internal pressures, there is the question of external influence operating below the threshold of open conflict. Historically, intelligence agencies have played roles, sometimes decisive, sometimes marginal, in shaping political outcomes in adversarial states. It would be reasonable to assume that organizations such as the Central Intelligence Agency and the Mossad are actively engaged in gathering information, building networks, and exploring opportunities to exploit vulnerabilities within Iran's political system. The extent and effectiveness of such activities are, by nature, difficult to verify. However, their potential existence introduces an additional variable into the strategic equation: the possibility that external pressure is not limited to military and economic domains, but also extends into the internal political landscape. This leads to a more nuanced formulation of the regime change question. Rather than viewing it as a binary outcome imposed from the outside, It may be more accurate to see it as a process emerging from the interaction between external pressure and internal evolution. Military actions can weaken certain institutions, economic stress can erode legitimacy, and informational or covert efforts can amplify divisions. None of these factors alone is likely to produce rapid transformation. But in combination under specific conditions, they could create a window in which a shift, whether gradual or abrupt, becomes possible. Importantly, such a shift would not necessarily result in a pro-Western democracy. A more realistic outcome might be a system in which the explicitly theocratic elements of governance are reduced, rebalanced, or reinterpreted, leading to a state that is less ideologically confrontational and more pragmatically oriented. If such a transformation were to occur, the strategic implications would extend far beyond Iran itself. The Middle East has long been shaped by a balance of competing powers, with Iran playing a central role as both a regional actor and a symbol of resistance to U.S. and Israeli influence. A significant change in Iran's orientation would alter this balance in several ways. First, it would reduce the intensity of the security dilemma facing Israel, potentially lowering the likelihood of large-scale conflict, while also reinforcing Israel's strategic position. Second, it would shift the calculations of Gulf states, many of which have pursued hedging strategies, maintaining ties with both the United States and other major powers, including China. A less confrontational Iran could encourage greater alignment with a U.S.-led security framework, at least in the short to medium term. Perhaps most importantly, such a development would have implications for China's role in the region. Over the past decade, China has expanded its economic and diplomatic presence in the Middle East, positioning itself as a relatively neutral actor capable of engaging with all sides. This approach has allowed Beijing to secure energy supplies, invest in infrastructure, and avoid entanglement in regional conflicts. However, it also depends on a certain balance within the region, one in which no single external power exercises overwhelming control. If Iran were to move closer, even partially, toward a system less opposed to the United States, the overall structure of regional alignments could shift in ways that reduce China's room for maneuver. Energy security is a particularly critical dimension of this issue. China remains heavily dependent on imported oil, a significant portion of which passes through maritime routes and choke points influenced, directly or indirectly, by U.S. naval power. While China has sought to diversify its energy sources and develop alternative routes, including overland pipelines, the global energy system remains interconnected. A Middle East more firmly aligned with U.S. strategic preferences could increase the extent to which energy flows are shaped by geopolitical considerations. In such a scenario, energy security would not simply be a matter of supply and demand, but a function of political relationships and strategic leverage. This does imply that the United States would seek to control energy flows in a direct or coercive sense, but it does suggest that the broader environment in which these flows occur could become less neutral from China's perspective. At the same time, it is essential to recognize the constraints and uncertainties inherent in this scenario. The history of external attempts to influence internal political change is mixed at best. In some cases, such efforts have produced unintended consequences, including prolonged instability or the emergence of new forms of resistance. Iran's political system, despite its challenges, has demonstrated a degree of resilience over several decades, adapting to pressure while maintaining core structures of authority. National identity, institutional cohesion, and the capacity for internal repression all contribute to this resilience. Moreover, external intervention, whether overt or covert, can sometimes strengthen hardline elements by reinforcing narratives of foreign threat. Domestic politics within the United States also play a critical role. Sustaining a strategy that combines military pressure, economic measures, and indirect political influence requires not only resources, but also political consensus. In a polarized environment, with competing priorities and electoral considerations, maintaining that consensus over time can be difficult. Public tolerance for extended engagement in the Middle East has declined in recent years, shaped by the experiences of previous conflicts. Any perception that the United States is moving toward another open-ended commitment could generate resistance, both within Congress and among the broader public. Taken together, these factors suggest that the scenario under discussion should be understood not as a prediction, but as a possibility within a wider range of outcomes. It challenges the prevailing assumption that military success and strategic success are necessarily disconnected, while also avoiding the opposite extreme of assuming that one automatically leads to the other. Instead, it highlights the importance of intermediate variables, internal dynamics, external influence, and the interaction between them, in shaping long-term results. In this sense, the current situation may be less about a binary outcome, victory or failure, and more about the conditions under which different types of outcomes become more or less likely. Strategic analysis at its core is not about certainty, but about understanding these conditions and their implications. As events continue to unfold, the key question may not be whether the United States can win militarily, but whether it can navigate the complex transition from military pressure to political effect in a way that aligns with its broader objectives. That transition is inherently uncertain, but it is also where the most consequential outcomes are likely to winners. Thanks for watching.